Good afternoon, everyone. It's me, Rifat Jahan Usha. Welcome to our side event entitled Unstoppable Global Warming, Increasing Climate Loss Damage, and Human Mobility. This session held on COP29 brings together experts and practitioners to address the urgent realities of climate-induced displacement and the socio-economic impacts of acceleration climate change. Today's discussion is hosted by AOSED, ESDF, EADE, and USPC. We are honored to have a distinguished panel, Dr. Francis Yamany from Hugo Observatory and expert on environmental geopolitics and migration. Dr. Imad Adli from ESDF, a leading advocate for sustainable solutions across the MENA region. Shamim Arfeen from AOSED, sharing a grassroots perspective from Bangladesh, and Engineer Omar Aish from EADE, offering insights into sustainable development. We are privileged to have Dr. Anneliese Depoux as our moderator. His dedication and contribution to environment and sustainable development is exemplary, and we are truly fortunate to have him to our gratitude conversation today. We are also privileged to welcome guest speakers who will share additional perspectives, Farah Kofi and Dr. Alice Ballot. Due to space limits, we will invite two panelists, and our guest speaker will first the panelist, first Dr. Francis Yamany and Engineer Omar Aish will join us on stage, followed by Shamim Arfeen and Dr. Ahmed Adli. With that, I'm pleased to hand over our moderator, Dr. Anneliese Depoux. Thank you for being here. And Dr. Nishat sir is over to you now. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. When I was invited to come and moderate this session, I wanted to know what will be my job. And job is very simple. I'm the timekeeper. So time has been allocated to each one of you, the speakers and the discussant, and 7 minutes, around 7 minutes. So I will do that. And at the end, if there is still few minutes left, I will try to make my own comments. But at the beginning, let me take just 1 minute. The topic is very valid and it carries a sad tone to me. The reason I say sad, unstoppable global warming. That is why I'm calling it sad. The temperature is going up. If you look into IPCC report or any reports, the graph is like this. So we are somewhere here, and then it is going to go up. What is going to happen in next 100 years? If it had happened over maybe 10,000 years, the entire ecosystem and human beings would have adjusted. Somebody asked me, how do you adjust? I said, those who have fair skin, their color of the skin would be like mine with a higher temperature. So I will have minimum amount of adjustment, but some people may have to adjust a lot. But this will be a natural process. I'm partially joking. And then, as a result of the global warming, lots of adverse impacts are happening. Let me give you an example. In Bangladesh, the area where these organizers have their office in Khulna, which is in the southwestern part, they face hailstorm of the size of cricket ball, which has not been seen earlier. So what happens, it falls to a very small area, maybe 2-3 square kilometers, but the whole ground the crop is lost because they will be pulverized. And so we see the increasing level of damage, and then we have to link it up with the loss and damage, climatic loss and damage. There are two loss and damage terminology. One is for the disaster management people. Their loss and damage is direct loss and indirect loss, etc. But our loss and damage is possibly beyond adaptation. We cannot adapt anymore. And the best example would be human mobility or migration. From the southwestern part of Bangladesh, the area where AOSED works, the population growth is negative, which means that people are moving out. The Bangladesh's net population growth is right now around 1.1, 1.2%. But in the Khulna area, Satkhira area, this is minus 0.4%. So people are moving out. And that is a good example of loss and damage. This year, again, we had extreme flood in the eastern part of the country and then in the north central part of the country. The water is still there. It has not been drained out. And the main crop, which grows with the support of nature, we call it Kharif 2 or Amon, that has been lost in many places. And Bangladesh, being an economically poor country, is maintaining food security of the country through import of food grain from the region, from neighboring countries. But that requires huge amount of foreign exchange for the country. That money could have been used productively for the other development work. So I will stop here. And I'm sure I will get chance to opportunity to talk. Thank you. So our first speaker is Dr. Francois Jeminet, and he is from Hugo Laboratory or Hugo Observatory, my apologies. And he's a specialist on environmental geopolitics and migration dynamics at the University of Lake, lead author of IPCC 6 and director of the Hugo Observatory. Sir, you have the floor for 7 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'd like to say a few words for 7 minutes regarding how we can and should integrate migration and displacement into loss and damage, and how we can conceptualize the loss of habitability in terms of loss and damage. First, I'd like to insist on the fact that climate-induced migration is not a distinct category of migration. And I think that there is often a tendency in these negotiations and in public debates at large to try and characterize climate-induced migration as some sort of a new discrete category of migration. The reality of such migration in the field is that it is truly embedded in global migration dynamics. Climate impacts obviously influence the economic, social, political, and cultural factors of migration. Obviously, climate impacts can lead to tensions around land, around resources. Obviously, climate impacts will deprive many families, especially in rural regions, of their livelihoods. And therefore, when we consider climate-induced migration, there is often a bias to consider only people forcibly displaced by climate disaster. Yet, it is much broader than this. And obviously, when you consider people displaced by climate disasters, it is easy enough, so to say, to figure out the cost of providing humanitarian assistance, the cost of providing shelters, the cost of reconstruction. These are costs that you can easily, so to say, figure out. When we discuss the role of climate change on global migration dynamics, then it becomes much more difficult to assess the cost. That's the cost of the intertwining of factors. That's the cost sometimes of reaching a threshold above which people can no longer stay. And we're also discussing some intangible costs of migration, the loss of attractiveness for our region, the cost of being uprooted, the trauma which is often associated with displacement, and so on and so forth. And therefore, this is the first point upon which I'd like to insist, the fact that we're not talking about a discrete new category of migration here, but that we need to encompass also the role of climate change on other migration drivers. My second point has to do with the habitability of the places. We recently concluded a major research project called the Habitable Project. And this is a project that looks at how people define the habitability of the place where they live in. And what we found out in this project, which was conducted across 5 countries, 4 in Africa and 1 in Asia, what we found out is that the way people perceive the habitability of the place where they live has a lot to do with how they perceive subjectively the impacts of climate change. Yet, in these negotiations and in most public debates, there is a tendency to try and figure out the number of people who would be displaced on the basis of objective criteria. We would say when we reach that level of temperature, then that place is deemed no longer inhabitable. When we reach that level of sea level rise, people won't be able to live there anymore. And this is on this basis that some governments justify the relocation of some populations. Yet, how these impacts are being perceived by local populations is often different from the objective reality of these impacts. And obviously, people make their decision to stay or leave mostly on the basis of how they perceive the impacts. And if this perception is contrary to the reality of the impacts, then we have a problem, because that means that we should design the adaptation policies, make the assessment for loss and damage on the basis of the objective realities of climate impacts, or on the basis of the subjective perceptions, which have to do with one's aversion to risk, with one's expectations for the future. All of this will determine people's decision to stay or to leave. And this is something that we cannot easily encapsulate with climate models. And if you'd like to find out more about this Habitable Project, you can log into habitableproject.org and you'll find the results of the different studies. Finally, the final point I wanted to make is to draw your attention to the fact that at the same time that climate change will forcibly displace people, it will also forcibly make people immobile. And I think that a common, how to say, assumption about the effects of climate change on migration is that climate change will displace more people and that there will be mass migration associated with climate change. Obviously, climate change will displace more people, but it will also displace people differently. And I think that we should not oversee the role that climate change will have on the patterns of migration themselves. At the same time that more people will be forced to flee, more people will find themselves immobile, stranded, unable to leave and to relocate, also in the face of immediate danger. And these immobile populations also should find a place in our discussions on loss and damage. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for your excellent presentation. It's very, you presented the whole problem, the whole game in very simplistic, very simple format. We need to
simple and not
find
simplistic,
a threshold where people cannot stay in that particular place or location. So the policymakers should understand that. But even then, there would be some residual people who would not be able to move out. So when we think about the human mobility as a factor, should not consider the entire population is going to move out. Some are going to move out and they should be assisted, and some who would be staying back, possibly their fate should also be considered. It's my privilege now to invite Engineer Omar Ayash. He is the project manager of Engineering Association for Development and Environment. Sir, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for your time for attending this side event. Today we'll be talking about the affecting of global warming to Iraq. In the beginning, we will start with the context and importance for Iraq. Iraq is a nation already navigating socio-political challenges, now faces severe threats from climate change, which is driving displacement and Thank you so much. Okay. So as I was saying, which is driving displacement and expediting vulnerabilities in already fragile areas. Climate-included migration is becoming a central issue as rising temperatures, water scarcity, and extreme weather conditions forces thousands of Iraqis to leave their own homes. As COP29 approaches, Iraq joins the global community in emphasizing the need for immediate actions, financial support, and strategic policies to address these emerging climate changes. The objective of this presentation is to aim the highlights on climate-related challenges that affecting Iraq and the need for financial support and the purpose of strategic actions for COP29 to help Iraq build resilience and manage displacement caused by the climate impact. The climate change and displacement in Iraq. As we can see, the CO emissions per capita in Iraq are equivalent to 4.5 tons per person based on the population of 44 millions and something, has been increased by 22% over the figure of 4.18 CO2 tons per person registered in 2021, as you can see in this graph here. This has affected several things. First, the rising of temperature and extreme heat. Iraq is one of the countries that most vulnerable to rising temperature, which average temperature is increasing. Extreme heat is no longer limited to summer months. The country now experiencing prolonged heat waves exceeding 50 Celsius through summer and other months. This impacts on agriculture, water availability, and public health. Extreme heat also disturbs the daily life, economic productivity, and energy resources with frequent power outage during peak demand periods affecting both urban and rural populations. It's also affecting the water as we're facing now water scarcity crisis. The flow of Iraq primary water sources are the Tigris and Euphrates has decreased drastically due to the upstream damming by neighbor countries and climate-related reductions in participations. In southern Iraq, saltwater intrusion has worsened due to the reduce of fresh water flow, especially in Basra, degrading water quality and agricultural lands. By 2030, water shortage could impact the livelihood of millions, prompting a humanitarian crisis with displacement rates expected to surge as access to clean water diminishes. The impact on agriculture and food security. Agriculture employs major percentage of Iraqi workforce, particularly in the rural areas where communities rely on farming and their primary source of income. Due to water scarcity, arable land has been reduced by over 50% in some areas, forcing farmers to leave their own land and being able to strain crops or livestock. Low agricultural productivity threatens Iraq food security and increases the price of basic goods, affecting Iraq's most vulnerable population and prompting further immigration to urban areas. The migration hotspots are provinces in southern Iraq, especially Basra and region along with Euphrates and Tigris, are seeing high rates of migration. The southern regions are experiencing high soil salinity, frequent droughts, and reduced water access, driving communities from rural to urban areas. For the socio-economic vulnerabilities amplified by the climate impacts, we can see rising unemployment and poverty. Iraq's youth unemployment rate is high, and climate change threatens to collapse the agriculture sector, driving up unemployment and pushing rural families into cities in search for an alternative income, which already is scarce. The poverty rate is projected to increase significantly as climate-induced job losses are rising, potentially pushing many below for the poverty line. The urban strain and social tension, cities like Baghdad and Basra are facing an influx of rural migrants, leading overburdened infrastructures, which are already facing the challenges, housing shortage, and strained public services. This rapid Urban migration also fuels the competition for jobs and sources, escalating social tension and contributing to potential security challenges in the future. Housing and sanitation issues in formal settlements are particularly problematic, with the displaced families living in conditions that lack the basic amenities and services. Health impact of climate change. The rise of temperature coupled with the frequent dust storms has led to increase of respiratory illnesses, heat-related ailments, and water-prone diseases. Vulnerable groups, including children that already and low-income population, face significant health risks, placing additional stress on Iraqi already limited healthcare infrastructures. Dust storms are now occurring more frequently, increasing respiratory issues and impacting the quality of life, particularly in urban centers. The climate finance gaps and need for COP29 actions. Inadequate resources for adaptation. Iraq's adaptation budget is limited, covering only a fraction of what is needed for addressing the escalating challenges. With minimal financial resources, Iraq rural communities struggle to adopt resilience measures such as drought resistance, crop, or advanced irrigations. Importance of climate finance for Iraq. Climate finance is essential for Iraq to build a sustainable resilience future. This funding would help Iraq to transition to renewable energy, implementing sustainable agriculture practices, and build critical infrastructure to witness climate impact. Iraq required international climate financing to fund water management projects, restore degraded areas, and build resilient housing for those at risk of displacement. As we can see, the NDC for the planning for Iraq, now we're 2025 and still facing many delays in this area. For the civil society role in Iraq, climate reform will be building many NGOs and civil societies and organizations are building community awareness and engagement through EADE, and other Iraqi civil society organizations are essential in raising awareness of climate impact, advocating for sustainable practices, and educating communities about water conservation and climate resilience. CSO organize workshops and training sessions that equip local population with the knowledge and skills to adapt for environmentally friendly practices, fostering community-led adaptation and initiatives. Increasing the awareness of using renewable energy such as solar and wind system for electricity and hybrid and electrical vehicles. Also, EAD encourages the farmers to use new technologies in irrigation as solar pumping and the dropping system for irrigations. Building the community awareness and engagement. The suggested actions and policy directions. Redirect fossil fuel subsidies. Iraq is encouraged to consider relocating the fossil fuel subsidies to climate adaptation projects in vulnerable regions, using those funds to build resilience, reduce emissions, and protect at-risk communities. Engage the private sector in climate financing. CSOs encourage private sector to invest in renewable energy, sustainable agriculture, and water conservation. These sectors not only contribute to resilience, but also create jobs and economic opportunities for Iraqi citizens. Noting that the lack of investment of private sector is due to the previous security situations that compiled through the years. 3. Embedded human rights protection in climate policies. Iraq emphasized that human rights must be central to climate finance framework. Displaced individuals, especially women, children, and indigenous groups, need protective policies that safeguard their rights and ensure their equitable treatment. At the end, the Iraqi administrative challenge. Even though Iraq has a big annual budget, it's not utilized in the optimum way, as most of the annual budget is spent on salaries of governmental employees that exceed by far the required amount of staff due to the lack of private sector engagement and investment. The closing message for our organizations. Iraq, one of the frontline of climate change, with displaced risk growing as climate impacts worsen. COP29 offers an opportunity to create meaningful and provide Iraq with the support it urgently needs. Call to action. We call on COP29 leaders to prioritize the climate finance, support adaptation, and establishing robust frameworks to aid climate-stressed populations. By working together, we can address the urgent need of Iraq and create a resilient future. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Engineer Omar Ayash. This is a very good summary very systematically presented what are the issues with Iraq, what are the rising concerns, like people are moving out and coming to the cities and they don't have decent living places, their living condition, their problem with health. And another increasing problem that is being faced increasingly is the dust. And the government is trying to obtain finance to build a resilient and sustainable future for its people, but it's a tall order. While he stated that Iraq is one of the frontline country with climate change adverse impacts, I believe this statement is true for almost all the countries of the world. So we collectively need to develop better understanding of the migration process. In some country, the data available to trace who is moving out and where is reasonably good, but in some country, I can talk about Bangladesh, that kind of mechanism doesn't exist at all. Our next speaker is Shamim Arfeen of AOSED. So he's the executive director with more than 25 years of experience with water justice, environment and climate just change, and disaster and displacement. And he has gathered demonstrated experience in policy advocacy and program implementation. Shamim, you have the floor.
Honorable moderator, speaker, and guest and participant. Thank you for joining us today this side event. But our discussion is very small and similar also, because which one? Just a snapshot. The first COP is Berlin. That was 1995. And previous COP 28 in 2023. Under the UN CCC process, in this year, more or less 30 years, the global leader tried to become a common understanding how to reduce greenhouse gases. And during this COP, they also taken lots of commitment, treaty, agreement, fund. At this moment, more or less 6 fund in the board. But reality is that the first COP was 1995 and now is 2024. Greenhouse gases increasing. But question is that why? If global leader become to conserve really environment ecology, not business, and human rights, it should be reduced earlier. Why this process we follow again and again, and every year the new commitment. I'm showing very small area in this Southwest Asia in the last 10 decades. Only flood, the significant flood in Jammu Kashmir, in India and Pakistan, the debt was 500 plus, and economical loss 16 billion US dollar. Similarly, in 2017, India, Nepal, Bangladesh, 1,200 people has been died, and economical loss and damage 3.5 billion. So this is a lot of issues in there. At this moment, I know I don't mention all the information, but only this slide is $80 billion last 1 decade has been lost, but there is no calculate non-economical loss and damage. Major climate events in South Asia has recently, the 10 years, we saw that the heat wave is very dangerous, and this is not so-called resiliency, because in Bangladesh, our temperature will be this year, in April, that was in our Khulna area, that was 4.3 degrees Celsius. That was quite impossible to human being to survive such type of uh, heat wave. So it is increasing. If it is more increasing, so what will be, I don't know. And earlier we talked about this some issues behind the scene. The non-economical loss and damage is a big damage loss. We have not calculated at this moment. We have not no compiled data and information and evidence also. We have very some small study, but all over the country, all over the world, the non-economical loss and damage are mainly facing the poor and vulnerable community especially. So this is another information. In last year in Bangladesh, internal human mobility was 1.7 million. Previous year was 3 million. So what every year our internal migrant people are ongoing process. Our honorable moderator from the very beginning said that in Khulna area uh, is population rate not growth is minus 0.04 or minus 4.0. So this is the real condition of southern part of the Bangladesh. And this is Bangladesh scenario. Already Bangladesh is a very vulnerable position at this moment due to global warming. Our sixth season now become a three season. One of the short duration of monsoon. Previously, our monsoon was 90 days to 105 days. Now become is 45 days to 60 days, and this is create lot of problem, especially the flash flood and some water is stagnant. At the same time, very hot summer and long duration, and cold winter, very cold winter, very short duration. So our real season is not activate at this moment due to climate change. That's why our agriculture, our livelihood, of course, has been the change day by day. But and our poor and rich people gap day by day the increasing. Uh, I I would like to say that this is the last COP international last 28 years. We also on board lot of commitment and fund also. Civil society, what are doing? Civil society doing at a global level and local level. They ask lot of issues. The slogan is very young people. They are also there. But what is the reality? So we would like to share this just a simple word: climate justice, human rights. If you would agree with me, yes. So we can say together, yes. Climate justice, all everybody. Climate justice, human rights. Climate justice, human rights. Thank you, everybody.
Shamim, let me say thank you very much. Actually, you did a very good study of what is happening in Bangladesh, and that has lots of similarities with what is happening in Iraq. So issue is the intensity and frequency of adverse impacts are increasing. So if we accept the current level of migration, either from rural areas in Iraq or rural areas of Bangladesh to the urban areas where they come in search of job, that rate possibly would be enhanced by a bigger degree or higher rate as the adverse impacts of climate change become more prominent. Last night I was watching a TV channel of Bangladesh, and it reported 4 storm surge or cyclonic weather is going to hit Japan one after another First one is going to hit maybe tomorrow or day after tomorrow. The second one is in queue. Third one is in further queue. But the fourth one is already a solidly identified depression. And the newscaster was saying that such an event has never been experienced anywhere in the world, one after another cyclone with a gap of 7 days. So we should think about that. We should be ready about it. So that takes me to our last panelist, Dr. Emad Adli. He is the General Coordinator of Arab Network for Environment and Development and President of Egyptian Sustainable Development Forum. So, Dr. Emad.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And just to clarify, I'm the last panelist, but there are guest speakers that will come later, so I'm not the last one today. Thank you very much, and I'm glad that I'm coming after the three presenters before me, because actually they have put the main idea that will clarify what I'm going, and also I will build on what we heard from Francoise and from Dr. Omar and from Shamim. Can I have my presentation, please? You have my presentation. But I don't see. Okay. So what I am going to put here is something that will show. Oh, Fatma, you're here. Your Excellency, Ahlan wa sahlan, alhamdulillah. Here I'm going to give an overview on a study that we did with the support of Norwegian Refugee Council, the NRC, and in which we actually put and find the challenges that are facing the two sides, actually, the people who are able to be displaced and those who are not able to be displaced. And this very much complement to what Francois said, because it's not only that the problem is in the displaced people, but it's also for the people who do not have any possibility to displace. At some point, the displacement could be a solution, but sometimes the solution is not even there. So we had the study actually in two sites, one in Egypt, in the northwest part of Egypt, and another one in Sudan, in Kordofan. The whole idea was to, and I'm going to put here the emphasis on the one that we had in Egypt. And this is an area that is considered one of the places that is helping the food, and the whole country is building on it for the food security. So the challenge here and the risk here is not as we heard from Shamim and others about the flooding, but here was the drought as a slow onset process, and is affecting the population that is living in 35 villages, and they have more than 10,000 settlers in this area. The first thing we discovered that, when we looked at the problem, the identification, you can see on the map here, you can show you how the areas, the drought frequency has increased in this area, which is, as I said, the north part. If you look at on the right side up there, the green map is Egypt, and the red spot is the area where we had our study. It's very close to the coastal, the Mediterranean coast, but it is, as I said, and also in the west part of the delta, and it was considered as a place where they can have the expansion of the agricultural lands for the Egyptian food security process. And you can see here how the drought has been increased between, the area in like 20 years ago, and in the area, and in recently, when with the maps we have, this was the beginning of 2010, 2012. So this is why then we noticed that people are leaving, and they started to to leave this area and to try to find other places to live and to take their families again from this area. And this was an example of how displacement could be also linked to disasters and also to climate change, which when we had the study actually, and when we start thinking about it almost 12 years ago, the government of Egypt did not see that has any relation with the climate change, and it took some time until we were able to discuss this. And now I'm very proud that I see Egyptian negotiators are talking about the drought and about the climate induced displacement that's happening in the country. This is, some of the photos shows the area that we were dealing with, but I can look at how the impact of the drought has affected this area. We had the 5 components: the environmental impact, the economic impact, the social impact, the health impact, and then the displacement was the last impact that is affecting the community. But if you look at all the impacts, when it comes to displacement, it would be the last resort for the people. But you can see also how the impacts are affecting the decision, and they are making the people to decide at the end to go and to leave the area because they are not anymore able to survive. Because definitely when it became, the agriculture output is declining, and they discovered that, they cannot live anymore and they cannot get their livelihoods sustainable in this area, and they start to think differently. But one of the elements that we also found in the message in the study, that the agriculture people, the people working in the area of agriculture, and this is part of the study, was how we can avoid and minimize the risk. Of course, the elements and the reasons for having the drought happening, we cannot deal with it because it is something that is related to something outside, or could be handled by the government or the people living there. But definitely we can have different things to make things better and to minimize the risk and to reduce this risk of displacement and also of affecting the livelihoods of the communities. So this is why we found that we have to work with the people, and especially farmers and the people working in the local authorities, especially in relation to agriculture, how we can help them to work and to change their crops from this, are very much affected by the drought, to have crops that could really survive with the drought and the climate change. And we discovered also that the infrastructure in this area, including the telecommunication, including the health facilities, education facilities, all these things are also very important when you are thinking. You cannot think only about the climate issues, but you have to think also about other things that are also affecting the decision and making the people thinking about migrating or leaving the area where they live. Of course, using technologies, and this is why we were talking about also the energy part of it. And today we were showing in one of the sessions how we were using the solar technology in an area that has the very high level of solar radiation, that you can use also with the energy deficiency and the energy crisis in this area, how you can also use the solar and the renewables in supporting and giving alternatives for the communities there. And of course, the community itself, in organizing them and having them better and administer their lives, it's very important, because this is one of the things that in our study we realized, and the study actually became like at some point discussing the solutions and putting ideas and also providing the platform for the people to be able to get into their problems and discussing it, and also looking at solutions that could start from them. And this is why how to organize the community and helping them to organize themselves, it was one of the important things. Of course, there are other supplementary recommendations that some of them are very scientific, and this is why we included in our dialogue and our platform. We included the remote sensing institution and also the universities around this area to help them. And also we are raising this also at the level of the League of Arab States, not only in Egypt. And we are trying to build on this study and the results to help not only Egypt, but also the Arab countries, which are, most of them are affected by the same risks of drought in North Africa and also in West Asia. Definitely engaging the communities, civil society organizations, youth, women, in the decision-making process is very important. And to develop this and to have this, you need to have capacity development, not only for the civil society, not only for the communities, but also for the local authorities and the different stakeholders relevant to this issue. I'm putting here also some recommendation in the sense of how we can help and build the capacity of the communities, especially when it comes to preparedness and financial support because one of the elements, of course, was and the findings was the financial crisis or the financial problems. But we discovered during the study that having the partnership between the different actors, were able to, at some point, to cover at least 40 to 50% of the needs that we have discovered that they are important for the remedy or the minimizing the risks in this area. Of course, we have in the study, we have put ideas for how we can make strategies for this region. These are strategies. Some of them are already taken to the League of Arab States to be discussed at the regional level, and some of them also to be replicated in some other countries, because unfortunately in most of the Arab countries, and I think this is the situation in most of the countries, we don't have clear strategies when it comes to climate-induced displacement and human mobility due to climate change. So here are some of the some of the pictures of how we were able to do the community dialogues and also the stakeholders dialogue, and also we were able to change during this. Because of this project, we were able to make this administrative shift, because it was before, it was always thinking that, the administration could be only by the government, but here the administration shift is how we can develop this kind of committees, platforms at the local level, and then the administration should be collectively done by the different stakeholders. The study has led to some actions in the area of education, healthcare, sanitation, activities for youth, and also for sports, infrastructure and utilities, all these things that were able to be not achieved at the level which we wanted to have, but at least the minimum to keep and to make the area more secured of getting more affected by the climate risks, and also to increase the displacement happening in this area. Also, the programs I'm finishing, the knowledge management tools and the capacity development activities that is already going on in this area has very much helped the different stakeholders also in maintaining and keeping this area resilient. And I think this was a good example of how we can help communities to be more resilient towards this drought crisis in the area, in the region, the Arab region. And we have here, of course, some of the key messages, especially when it comes to empowering the communities, especially when it comes through knowledge, how to deal with the resources in an efficient way, the adaptation start at the local level, and also the proactive crisis management, because when we went there, it was not considered as an area of crisis, and also the long-term coordination between the different stakeholders. I think this is some of the I would say the prescription for how we can deal with areas that are affected by the climate, and it also affected the mobility and sustainability of the communities. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ahmad. It was not only an excellent presentation, but also a lot of things to pick up and to be learned by other country. You kind of said that how to prepare for this. I'm not sure whether any country in the world is ready to handle the climate change induced uh, migrants and resulting the loss and damage, whether they have assessed that. And you have already established your national committee, which is a big thing, and you have already started to support the people who are moving out. But the commonality between Bangladesh, Iraq, and Egypt is it is the most of the people who are dependent on farming, agriculture. They are the people who have to move out because of their problem with livelihood, and your problem, and also the Arab countries' problem is drought. Incidentally, the term drought is not clear to us in Bangladesh. I will tell you why. Because we have lots of rainfall. But if the rainfall is low, still there is rainfall, we call it drought or drought-like condition. But for you, I think drought means no rainfall at all. So that's the situation we do not face. So now it's time we move to some of our guest speakers. So the first, let me invite Saiduzaman Khan, who is a program development and quality manager for the Danish Refugee Council. And he brings in here huge experience in designing humanitarian programs, etc.
Thank you. Thank you, Honorable Moderator of this session and all the distinguished participants to this session. Let me take an opportunity to debrief on the key issues that I'm going to share today, because I work in the fields of international mobility and displacement. So I would just like to keep my discussions not only focused within the mobility issue and the refugee response, but at the same time focusing on the other parts that we currently are challenged with. So on the starting note, I would like to start with one of the focus problem, and that is like, as per the report of 2020, 108 million people were globally displaced. And out of this 108 million people who were globally displaced, only 62 million people were IDPs. That means, apart from all the calculations, climate change and climate induced displacement has been a major issue all over the world that has been foreseen. Even if we just look into the trends of the data that we found, like in the last 40 years and 60 years analysis, it was mentioned that 19.2 million people were displaced due to the flooding, and at the same time, approximately 12 million people, they were displaced because of some of the other including thunderstorms. So when we actually look into combining both of the figures together and putting our hands on the globe that to look into the crystal ball, then we might also be able to see the predictions that has been made that by 2070, approximately 3 billion people will also have to face the consequence of climate change, which is obviously one of the huge challenges that has been foreseen and projected as a part of the model. So we call it in the emergency context a triangle of trouble. The quick remedies and the kind of interconnections between two of the factors. They call it is a result of conflict and at the same time climate change, which require short-term and long-term programming strategies at the same time. But these interconnections, sometimes it doesn't really correspond to the need that we foresee. It needs a lot of challenges that has to be solved connecting with the local actors. Because if we, in most of the countries, in most of the decision making, it has been seen all over the world, the decisions have become top-down approach rather than bottom-up or taking the voice, or the participation of the people who are being affected with this. So we have seen that to ensure this, the participation of this local people in the decision making, at the same time ensuring their rights to access the civic and their right, as Mr. Shamim was also mentioning about the climate and human right, the interconnections between these two. So how their human rights are being ensured as a part of the victim, and at the same time looking into that how they can be able to prepare and adapt for the environmental challenges. So in this segment, we really need to focus on the question. Sometimes what happens in the diplomatic zones and the diplomatic areas, it has been suggested that some of our own suggestions. And when we talk about incorporating this challenging terminology, that comes with an outlook, and that outlook really comes with 4 specific questions: that who we are thinking of the building their resilience. So the question is it resilience for the refugees? Is it resilience for the climate induced victims? Or is it the government or the market systems? Resilience of whom? And how we are going to do that resilience? At the same time, making sure that there is a we have seen in the emergency context that resilience building is obviously important, but there is a response framework that saves life. So it is also important to promote durable solutions with the viable issues that might connect women, children, and the most vulnerable communities, or the people that we sometimes they remain not very focused in the part of the discussion. So we also had conducted a particular study including 4 different organizations, starting from Swedish Environmental Institute, then Mixed Media Center, with the support from Danita. And we found some of the interesting facts that what are the models and the local authorities can, how the climate displacement and these particular issues can work. In some of the parts in Middle East and North Africa, we found that community encouragement model that comes with the payment and in participation of them into the decision making, that obviously helped them to build a kind of association. And this association actually gave them the power to negotiate with the local authority. That was one of the big achievement for them. But at the same time, the similar model, sometimes we haven't seen that worked in other refugee or other emergency contexts. So uh, this is also important as an overall approach, that community-led approaches has to be the one of the driving principle to deliver the interventions, and at the same time focusing on that has a regenerative impact and incorporate the climate migration and peace building in that approach. So on the hazards are being intensified, and in this aspect, climate change call, we think securing the long and short-term funding with flexibilities and finding out the solutions for the government and for the people, it is also necessary. And at the same time, in line with this, I would like to just start in with, and I would like to focus with a motto that I really found: preventing human mobility is a joint responsibility. It's not a single party's work. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Saif Zaman. I mean, you started with some kind of global data about what is the number of people who are moving out or migrating. Our concern is this is going to increase, which is evident from the title of this particular discussion session. Global warming is not getting stopped. It is increasing, and increasing faster than we were hoping. As for example, 2030 was the target date to keep the temperature below 1.5, but it had happened last year. It is already there. So I think now it's my privilege to invite Dr. Anneliese Depoux, He's the policy advisor to IMD MC/NRC. In front of me, I have a short bio, but even then is very impressive. And she carries lots of experience, and she is working with the global some bodies who are trying to bring the developing countries and developed countries together and address the issue more professionally. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the organizers of this side event for the invitation to share a few reflection with you. Just let me start maybe by just saying a few words about IDMC, because I will maybe start by talking a little bit more. We've heard by previous panelists about situation in Bangladesh, in Iraq, and in Egypt, but I will maybe complement this picture by adding a few more examples based also on the data that we are analyzing at IDMC. And IDMC stands for Internal Displacement Monitoring Center. So per definition, we focus our work on internal displacement. We don't look at cross-border mobility. But we are a Geneva-based organization, and we analyze data on internal displacement, both in the context of conflict and disasters. But obviously, for this context, I will focus more on the disaster displacement component of our work. And what our data show, and maybe I will start also by that, is that, as we speak, Spain, for instance, is dealing with a massive crisis following historical floods in the region of Valencia that affect close to 200,000 people. Earlier this year, Brazil was also facing its largest disaster displacement event with above 800,000 displacement recorded only in the region of the Rio Grande do Sul. But also in Asia, Typhoon Yagi caused 2 million displacement across Philippines, Myanmar, and China. We spoke a lot already about Bangladesh, but Cyclone Remal this year triggered 1.6 million displacement across Bangladesh and India. And I could continue this list for quite some times, but I'm gonna stop the list here. And at IDMC, we record data across 200 countries and territories. And one thing that our data shows very clearly is that this phenomenon affects absolutely everywhere, affect everyone, everywhere. So we report disaster displacement in almost every country on Earth today. And something that has been also mentioned by Francois is that one element that our data show as well is that disaster or the impact of climate change are not the only factor that can drive the decision of people to move. And also what we observe is an overlapping of crisis between conflict and climate change in different places. For instance, last year we recorded the conflict displacement in about 45 countries across the world, and among them 42 were also recording disaster displacement. And this overlap of crisis is really important to look at, because that means that people's vulnerabilities are doubled and increased by these multiple crises that they are facing over time. And the data actually, so we record data on disaster displacement since 2008. On average, since 2008, it's 22.5 million displacement every year that we record due to disasters. And we know, based on the IPCC report, and I think the last one was very speaking, that there is now a high degree of confidence that climate change increased both the frequency and intensity of weather-related hazards that are triggering displacement. So we can expect indeed in the future, if there is no action taken in this kind of space where we speak here in Baku, a significant also increase of displacement associated with such hazards. And also it's important to say that even if the figures that I'm just telling you looks important, they are also clearly underestimated, because there are actually plenty of things that we are not in capacity today to properly monitor. I mean, for instance, there are data in some countries that are not available, so we cannot report on displacement in those countries just because the data are not collected or are not available. Slow onset processes is much harder also to estimate. So we have quite good data for disasters such as floods or cyclones, but it's also very hard to know how many persons are additionally displaced by drought or by sea level rise or erosion or this kind of slow onset processes. So in reality, the figure are probably much higher than the one you are hearing today. And displacement is strongly intersecting and connected to loss and damage. That is a focus of the negotiation to this year. And it intersects with loss and damage in different ways. I mean, first, I would say that the scale of displacement that we are seeing today is a clear indicator of the severity of loss and damage experienced by people. I mean, when people are forced to move, we are not talking anymore about adaptation or resilience. I mean, we are clearly seeing the limits of adaptation. So that's a clear indicator of that. But displacement also in itself, because it disrupts lives, it disrupts livelihoods, it disrupts cultural identity, it destroys social ties of communities, is also creating loss and damage for the communities who are displaced. And we need to address all of these impacts, especially because we observe that displacement, we can think that, especially following a disaster, displacement tend to be temporary. I mean, people are going to be displaced after a disaster for a couple of weeks, but in reality, I mean, people can be displaced for a much longer period of time. And when we assist to protracted displacement, or when people stay displaced for months or even years sometimes, their vulnerabilities keep increasing and they don't find durable solution. And actually, this displacement have multiple costs, both economic and non-economic cost for communities. And just talking about economic cost, I think displacement adds up to tens of billions of dollars every year for country, whether it is in the form of loss of assets, loss of income, but also the cost of the humanitarian response to assist people who are displaced. And this cost disproportionately affect, in particular, the low-income countries, where it can amount to a significant portion of their GDP, and it can also hinder the development gain of those countries. So these costs are extremely important to look at, but the reality is actually that despite this cost, that we in reality have some difficulties to properly assess. I mean, there is no good methodology today to really tell how much displacement costs, but we know that it costs several billions per year, but exactly how many is still something that we need to improve our methodologies to know that. But what we know is that displacement is totally overlooked in the loss and damage assessment that are used actually today to also estimate the total value of the loss and damage on Earth. That countries need to address, and that are used also as a basis for the negotiation here when we are talking about the new collective quantified goal and the need to integrate a sub-goal on loss and damage. When we're trying to estimate those loss and damage, the reality that all the numbers that we are hearing are underestimated because they do not take into account the cost of some of loss and damage, such as displacement, that is not included in this cost. So the costs that are actually much higher. And that's, in my view, the reason why displacement should be a priority in the loss and damage discussion today. And it should be also a priority in the loss and damage funding decision that we are discussing here in Baku. And one progress that we have observed last year in Dubai was that, yes, displacement is included in the scope of the fund for responding to loss and damage. So that's something we can acknowledge. I mean, it's a good thing. I mean, displacement is part of the fund, so it means that it can open the door for implementing activities to address displacement. But still, I mean, there is much progress and more efforts that are necessary to ensure, for instance, that displaced communities will have access to this fund. I mean, as of today, it's still unclear in terms of access modalities to the fund for responding to loss and damage, how affected communities and displaced communities in particular will be able to access this fund. And also actors who are implementing measures like grassroots organizations, for instance, who are working with displaced communities, how are they going to be able to also access the fund to support these communities? And maybe just to conclude and with the last point is that in addition to the finance that is extremely important to address displacement today, the technical assistance is also equally important to support countries and to support communities to respond to displacement. And here we are within the loss and damage architecture that now exists within the UNFCCC. I mean, we have the Santiago Network for loss and damage, and the Santiago Network also has a role to play to help addressing displacement, because the Santiago Network can provide actually the expertise to strengthen the capacities both at national and at local levels to help countries and communities to either prevent displacement or also to respond to displacement. And just a last example that I want to give is that we are also discussing here the articulation between the different bodies of this loss and damage architecture. So, for instance, the articulation between the Santiago Network and also the WIMEXCOM. And maybe you know that as part of the WIMEXCOM, there is something called the Task Force on Displacement that exists in the Paris Agreement. And this Task Force on Displacement has developed some knowledge project that can be extremely useful for countries to help them, for instance, integrating human mobility within their national adaptation plans. There has been a technical guidance developed this year by the TFD, and these technical guidance are the type of tool that should also be considered by the Santiago Network to be translated at country level to help countries to also integrate those considerations within their national planning. And for instance, I've heard a Bangladeshi negotiator yesterday say that they are already planning to use this technical guide developed by the TFD to use it for their own national planning. So that's, in my view, a good example also of how this space in which we are today, this COP, can also support and contribute to address displacement by supporting countries, by giving them also the technical assistance that they need. And I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ellis. You know what is happening inside the IPCC process because you're a member of the Task Force on Displacement of the Executive Committee of the WIM, and you know Bangladesh reasonably well. So what are the problems that we are facing? And the number of migrants or displaced people, in my personal view, is going to rise very rapidly all on a sudden, and for which the countries are not, I don't think they are ready. We are talking about displacement and migration and loss and damage. The term loss and damage in climate change arena first was raised in 1992, and then till 2010 in Cancun. Between this period, it was almost dormant. So we have to develop better understanding, not only what is to be done, but when we can call it that this particular natural disaster would fall under loss and damage categorization. It's my privilege now to invite Farah Kabir. She is the country director of ActionAid, and she is one of the strong advocates on climate change justice. Farah, you have the floor.
Thank you, Dr. Anneliese. So, since I'm the last speaker, I mean, everyone said most of it. Would you agree with what the speakers were saying, that climate change is a game changer for human life in every sphere? Do you agree? Do you feel from what you've heard that it is a game changer? And especially with the global warming continuing, it is now reaching that level? Yes? No? So the presentation before me, the speakers before me, I think that's the point that they were all emphasizing. And I come from a delta. And I was recently reading something where they were saying that people living in the delta areas in developing countries are especially prone to suffer from the effects of repeated disasters that can be attributed to climate change. There are other problems in the delta, but this was. And global warming, as every speaker has said, has actually not been reduced, but it's accelerated. And it continues, the temperature rise continues. So greenhouse gas emission, failure to mitigate, adaptations are not working. So you know all that, that has been taken. So I will not repeat that. But if I bring the focus to my country, Bangladesh, and we see that repeated cyclones, disasters, floods, heat waves are becoming more frequent and severe. Like there was the Sundarban fire breakout, cyclone Rema, I mean, the floods in between July, August, and so on. So the climate shocks negatively affect economic security. And I think Imdad gave us a list of all the 5 factor drivers and factors for migration. And of course, the discussion has also been about loss and damage. I remember in 2006, there was a big report on The Guardian that how by 2050, there will be XXX millions of people who will be climate refugees, right? And at that time, no one was listening. Later, 10 years later, they're still talking about climate migration. They're still, as Dr. Nishad has said, they're not prepared. And why aren't they prepared? Because the relationship between climate change, human mobility, can't be reduced to a scenario of just displacement and mass migration flow. It's very layered. It's got lots of nuances, and we need to understand. Now, where I work and the country I come from, someone mentioned that you are forced to migrate. Until that situation arises, people try to stay where they are. But when they have no options, there's loss of livelihood, there's loss of security, social capital, socio-economic implication, negative implications, and they end up moving. And there's also the destruction of ecosystems, habitat, biodiversity. So there's a long-term consequences as well. Water levels have, the water stress, water levels have depleted. Now, this whole issue of migration or displacement, we know we have different groups. Imdad and I, we have been part of what is known as the Platform for Disaster Displacement for the last 10 years. We've been pushing the policymakers to look at this. But what has happened is the multidimensional and intersectionality of it. And one thing that we are now talking about, this chaotic movement. It's not always planned. And the chaotic movement from rural areas or affected areas end up coming to the urban areas, and then there's chaotic urbanization. So this is one phenomenon. And what we also know is, for instance, in Bangladesh, it's men who migrate more because of loss of livelihood and economic reason. But then after men migrate, the women, the family, they also have to, they often stay back because it's the last resort to move, but then they have to. And when they migrate, it is, there is a very strong gender dimension to it. There's a strong rights dimension to it. The person who comes from the affected area to an urban slum has to pay way more than what you and I would pay in terms of water bill, electricity, or even the space to stay, what they call home. The per square feet comparison with the rent I would pay and the person coming to a slum or an informal settlement would be way, way more higher. So this needs to be built into the loss and damage narrative. It's not just about the infrastructure. It's not about the roads and the crops we're losing. It's also about the social dimension. And the women and girls, when they are suffering from different disasters, they lose. Again, it's a protection issue. Children are not getting education. There's loss of livelihood, and they end up being in the labor market. They don't have the strength or the resources to bargain in a market, you mentioned market, but how do they negotiate and bargain? So it ends up making them very vulnerable. These displacement also is making us vulnerable because food security is being suffering, agriculture is suffering. These are the things that need to be put into the context when we are talking about the global warming and the loss and damage and human mobility. There's exploitation, there's extraction and exploitation. And these communities are highly vulnerable to that. So I would say, because a lot has been said, that despite the plurality of ways in which climate mobility nexus manifests itself, the subject may be at the risk of stereotyping understanding of the climate migration, and therefore policymakers and our decision makers may not be coming up with the required action plans and strategies. We talk a lot about national adaptation plan, we talk about city planning, we talk about urbanization, but I don't see them all sitting together. There's lack of coherence in policies. So basically, if I look at the gender inequality, social norms and economic inequalities often restrict women's access to financial resources. So unless she has the resources, it's difficult for her to move and make decision. She doesn't have entitlement of property. So that's a problem across the developing South Asian countries. What the North may take as, right to property, we can't, especially it's a very strong gender dimension. Gender perspectives are frequently unrepresented in the climate policies and adaptation strategies, limiting the effectiveness of the solution. Now, we are talking about empowering women and youth and capacity building. But while we are doing and investing in all this, the climate warming is putting us in a situation where we can't keep the pace. If you look at the temperature rise, if you look at how many people have become sick, the kind of diseases, the viruses, the respiratory problem, the air pollution, it's a struggle. And especially if you're from the South, if you're from a country like Bangladesh, you don't have the resources to deal with the health issues. It's not just economic, it's not infrastructure, it's the loss of education, and so on. So what do we do? I would like to advocate for climate policies that prioritize most valuable, most vulnerable, including women and displaced. Inclusive gender responsive adaptation strategies is very, very needed. Enhance the protections for climate-induced migration and ensure women's rights are upheld in migration and displacement contexts and make it inclusive. And developed nations should provide financial supports as grants for adaptation, loss and damage in affected countries. So I think the climate finance COP should make those investments, and it needs to be forthcoming. No loans, no more increase in debt, but grants and support to the most affected. Thank you.
Thank you, Farah. You made very good point and very good summary of how the whole thing should go. And I agree with you that the people who are moving out, the whole thing is still chaotic and nobody is not organized. And our first speaker said that we have to think not only about the people who are moving out, but also think about the people who are left behind. So they also need support. Now we have only 6 minutes. I was given 10 minutes. And I had 25 minutes or 20 minutes for disaster. Okay, he is indicating that I allow some questions, maybe 1 or 2 intervention, but please come to the questions directly. If you want to make an observation, please do that. In that case, none of us would respond to that. So please tell us whether you are making a statement or observation or you are asking a question. The floor is open. Very good. Thank you. Nobody is taking the floor. Nobody wants to be displaced from his seat or anything. No, I was trying to find some funny thing out of it. So I'm trying to summarize. We had 7 excellent presentation, very good, clear statement what is happening in Iraq, what is happening in Egypt, and what is happening in Bangladesh. And we noticed that the people are suffering mostly in the deltaic area, mostly in the coastal belt because of the salinity increase. In Bangladesh, we have in the NAB document, we have identified 14 hazards that are affecting us, which have intensity and frequency has gone up due to climate change. And we have identified 11 most vulnerable spots where urgently the government should pay attention, or whoever is trying to help the local community. And all these hazards are increasing in magnitude. Their timing is changing, and the timing is very important if that particular parameter like rainfall is related to crop or agriculture. So first point is there is a need to generate good data, because if we have to fight with the developed countries or plead for more fund and more support, they would definitely demand more authoritative data and demand that we prove that these people have moved out, has been displaced due to climate change. Because they would often raise the question, are these people economic migrant or climate change migrant? So that must be clear very strongly. My next point is that climate change was first raised in 1992 when actually 1991, when FCCC was being formulated. So they had 4 building blocks in those days: mitigation, adaptation, finance, technology transfer, and capacity building. These 4. Then some island countries, mostly the coral reefs or low-lying countries, they mentioned that what would happen to them. You cannot. In those days, the projected sea level rise was 4 meters. I'm talking 1991, 92. So they would totally disappear. And that is when the term loss and damage came in. So we need to define loss and damage. There is one loss and damage in literature that relates to natural disaster. But this loss and damage is different. 2 minutes. Okay. So I will finish. So our time is up. So I think more or less we agree that climate change has a big role in the migration dynamics. People who have to move out, there should be clear-cut program, and the debate is going at the global level, whether we call it WIM or any other thing. My last point is, I think the organizers, if possible, please place these presentations that were made in your website, and so that anyone interested can go through that and study it in more detail. And I'm sure the presenter would provide his contact address at the bottom of the presentation. With that, let me say thank you very much. It has been my pleasure to moderate this particular session. I organize the host for selecting me, and let me say thank you to the 7 presenters. Thank you very much.
Thank you.